We at the Media Research Center have been working with Congresswoman Harriet Hageman of Wyoming for quite a while. She's been a huge champion on First Amendment rights and really going after Mayorkas and others in the Biden administration who have been trampling on our First Amendment free speech rights. She is with us today. She is the primary co-sponsor of legislation that's really historic. Congresswoman Hageman, why did you introduce this legislation? Why was it important? Why do we need it?
So I think that it has been very apparent to the American public over the last 3 years that there's something broken in Washington, D.C. And what's been broken is the fact that our government has been weaponized against us. And one of the most obvious examples of that is the attack on the First Amendment. The collusion between this administration and the big tech companies, for example, suppressing speech related to election integrity related to the COVID, either where it came from or the response to it. The way that the government has affirmatively gone after conservative Catholics, claiming that they may be domestic violent extremists. All of the things that we're seeing is a government that has determined that our ability to exercise our First Amendment rights, most specifically our freedom of speech and the free exercise clause, our freedom of religion, is something that the government has been targeting. But there has been no mechanism by which we have a private cause of action to hold the people doing this accountable. You know, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the CDC, Fauci, Anthony Fauci. We have so many examples, but there is no mechanism by which I can sue.
Yeah. Now, you were a legal practitioner, a lawyer,
Yes.
in your home state of Wyoming. Most people watching this are not going to know what a 1983 action is, 42 U.S.C. 1983. But that is a right granted to American people to sue state and local officials for violating the rights. But there is no such right when federal employees conspire against us. And we have seen it over and over and over, where federal employees have initiated programs, created grant programs to silence us, creating artificial intelligence to silence us, calling us domestic terrorists, trying to catch us to stop us under anti-terrorism statutes. How will this legislation change that?
So it is patterned after Section 1983. And Section 1983 was adopted after the Civil War because states continued to try to violate the civil rights of individuals. And so what it says is that any person under color of state law who violates a constitutional right can be held personally liable. That's obviously paraphrasing it. We took that exact same language and applied it to the First Amendment, because we do have a mechanism by which we can challenge violations of our Fourth Amendment rights or our Fifth Amendment rights to due process and equal protection and that sort of thing. But the First Amendment has always been kind of carved out. And that's why I think you've seen over the last couple of years the efforts by these various federal agencies, unelected bureaucrats, people who are completely unaccountable to the American public. They are using their authority, their money, the vast resources that they have to try to target particular individuals or organizations and say, we're not going to allow you to speak because for political reasons. We saw it with Lois Lerner in the IRS, and people always say,
and I'm old enough, I remember that. I lived through that.
Yes, we did, and so did I. And yes, I was a practitioner. I'm a water and natural resource and constitutional attorney. I practiced law for 34 years before I came to Congress. And I've tried these cases.
Thank God you're here now. Thank God you're here for two reasons, for what you do and what your predecessor was not doing.
That's right. So for me, I looked at this as an enormous hole in our ability to fully exercise our constitutional rights, and specifically the Bill of Rights. And the First Amendment is so critically important to the health and welfare of a republic. It's about our freedom and our liberty. If the government can prevent us from speaking, they can take away all other rights.
So, I watched the entire markup, and it was really strong. You were excellent. Others chimed in who were really strong.
So good.
I was really interested in much of what Mr. Ivey said from the other side of the aisle. And a couple different times I wanted to jump out of my seat, and I was thinking, I wish I remember this committee right now. One thing he said that you so expertly addressed. He claimed that that federal employees who have under these Bivens claims, that they were acting outside the scope of their employment. And you were excellent at saying people are operating within the scope of their employment. Why is it so important that people can sue these federal employees who, within the scope of their employment, are trying to silence us?
So what he was trying to say is that when you have an action against, say, a police officer who was using excessive force, they're acting outside of the scope of their employment, and you can sue them under Section 1983. And I said, no, that's not what we're doing here. That the people that we are talking about, Mayorkas, for example, you may have heard his testimony when he came before our committee, and the Department of Homeland Security, and how they are targeting. They're using their power and their authority and their resources to target political speech on college campuses, for example. Mayorkas is acting fully within the scope of his employment, but he's doing something illegal under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. But right now, I have no mechanism to hold him accountable for that. If we pass this bill, if this legislation, the First Amendment Accountability Act, passes, then I could sue him. The people who were targeted by Lois Lerner, they could have sued her individually. They could have sued her personally, and not only receive damages and an injunction, but also attorney's fees. And that's critically important because so many times you're targeting people who may be lower income or who don't have the resources to fight the federal government. By including an attorney's fees provision in this bill, we are actually creating a situation where there will be constitutional attorneys who will jump at the chance of bringing these actions, because we need to rein in the government. What we need to understand, and we always have to go back to, is this is a government of, by, and for the people. The Bill of Rights, when you read that, they are negative rights. In other words, they don't say, I have the First Amendment right, freedom of speech. They say the government shall not infringe upon my freedom of speech. My freedom of speech, my right to speak, my right to exercise my religion, my right to petition my government for redress. Those are natural rights that are innate in me from the moment of conception. I have those rights. The government shall not infringe. The government shall not. But we've created a situation where our government has found a way to infringe and to violate that First Amendment. My bill, Dan Bishop's bill, the purpose of this is to rein that in, hold these folks accountable, and ensure that we're protecting the natural civil rights of all citizens in this country.
If you will indulge me one more time to flatter you, another section of this markup that I thought you were so strong in. Again, Mr. Ivey, was poking at the fact that the bill exempts the president and vice president. I've worked in the executive branch. I was a political appointee running the federal agency. You're exactly right. This legislation will empower those lower level, mid-level employees to be able to say to their bosses, to the cabinet secretaries and others, I cannot do this. I cannot do what you're asking me to do. I cannot take this action that will deprive somebody of their constitutional rights, because I might get sued.
I might get sued.
This is how it happens in government. You are empowering people to resist instructions that they wouldn't otherwise want to do.
One of the things that I've learned since I've been back here, and perhaps I always knew it, but you see a lot of finger pointing at all times whenever there is something that is bad that happens. Well, he told me to do it, and she told me to do it, and I was only following instructions. And no, that's not the answer here. The answer is because these are typically unelected bureaucrats who are making these decisions and targeting people, and maybe getting the instructions from on high, but then we expose that and we make sure that that person is never elected again. There's a difference between unelected bureaucrats and the elected officials, and that's addressed in this bill. But this gives, we always heard, well, what about the low-level employee in the Department of Ag that may be sued? And I'm like, if the low-level employee in the Department of Ag is violating someone's First Amendment rights, he should be sued.
Yeah.
And if they say, I was told to do it by the secretary or my supervisor, number one, that will come out during discovery. That will come out during the scope of the litigation. Bring them in. Sue them too. You can. It's not just the low-level employee, the lowest learners of the world. It's whoever was above her. And that was the thing. By never even being able to hold her accountable, We never were able to actually uncover how high that went and whether it was actually the President of the United States who was weaponizing the IRS against conservative enemies.
She met in the White House a number of times.
Well, and that's right. But a lot of this stuff gets to be covered up because we have to protect the secretary or we have to protect the president. No, if it's your money on the line, if you can be held personally accountable, you're going to be a lot less inclined to violate the right in the first place.
That's right.
And you're also going to be willing to say, I did what I was told to do, and I was told I would be fired if I didn't. Well, then I'm going to sue that person too. As the attorney, I want as many of those defendants stacked up as I can possibly get. So we want to hold everybody in the entire chain of command accountable.
Now, I've heard Senator Mike Lee and Senator Ted Cruz say positive things about this approach, this bill. Is there companion legislation in the Senate?
Not yet, but we will get there. We will get there.
Are there people that you're talking with in the Senate about this now?
Yes.
Anything you can say about it, or is this all hush-hush for now?
I don't know that it's hush-hush. It's just a matter of the process. And there have been so many things that have been going on. But we were the ones, this originated in the House in part because we've had the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And for anyone who has followed those hearings, what has really kind of been distilled out of that is the incredible gargantuan scope of the First Amendment violations that have come out of this administration in the last 3 years. And were there employees in the Trump administration that did it too? Yes. We're targeting the unelected bureaucrats because of the decisions that they're making.
You know, when we broke that story, and you used some of that content in the Mayorkas hearings, but we discovered that the individual who created that Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant program, the program itself, was the guy who had been known as Anonymous, the secret person in the Trump administration who was trying to upend. It's that guy who actually created the office.
The guy who went to the New York Times and alleged to be some high-level employee in the White House who was trying to save democracy and save all of us, and he had to remain anonymous because he would be targeted. And what he was doing was he was the one violating the First Amendment. That's always what's so interesting to me about this. And when you listen to this debate and this discussion, is I want the First Amendment for everyone. I'm not going to target political side. Speak your mind, leftists, speak your mind, people on the right. That's the point of this. More speech is better speech. More speech allows us to actually get to the truth of the matter at hand. What we've seen over the last 3 years, again, is because I believe so many on the left, they're losing the argument. They're losing the argument on the border. What happened during COVID was an absolute travesty and a tragedy, and we are going to be suffering the consequences of the bad decisions that were made for decades to come. The whole issue surrounding election integrity and what happened during the 2020 election and attempting to prevent people from even questioning whether, in fact, the 2020 election was rigged, even in certain states. When I was running for this seat, I said I believe that the 2020 election was rigged. And I had people coming out of the woodwork and actually threatening my bar license. You can't say that. You can't say that. Well, yes, I can. Prove me wrong. I get to say it under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. I get to say it. I can even say things that are untrue. I can say outlandish things. I can say hyperbolic things. But you can't, the government cannot say I don't get to say those things. And that's why I think that this bill is so incredibly important. And you can probably tell I'm quite excited that we got it out of committee today.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. It's a big win for the American public. Free speech is still alive and being protected by people like Congresswoman Hageman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.